Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. Today, we welcome set decorator Anthony Carlino, who joins us to talk about their work on one battle after another. Anthony will talk us through working on location and the creative decisions made to create the look of the sets. Please be warned that there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with Anthony. Hi, Anthony. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
We're here to talk about One Battle After Another, which came out last year, and it's now basically doing the, part of the award circuit machine. How have you found the reception to the film, with yourself being nominated for BAFTA and an Oscar, and also for the for set decorating awards as well?
It's been amazing. I mean, I didn't quite know what to expect. Contemporary movies rarely get recognized. So yeah, to have it recognized and all this, it's been amazing. It's been totally unexpected, and yeah, awesome.
Yeah, I guess as mentioned, like contemporary films they do get sometimes nominated, but I guess it's people are always more amazed with the sort of if it's a period film and people have recreated a certain time period. And yeah, I guess you've probably experienced that with Babylon a few years ago, where people were when you were nominated for that as well.
I think the award show and the award circuits always kind of lean towards sci-fi or period movies, where contemporary movies sometimes, a lot of times, the audience just assumes that it was there. We didn't do anything, which is kind of a compliment to us, because ultimately you want it to feel like we didn't do anything.
Oh yeah,
Dressing a set, it's you never want set dressing or the production design stand in front of what the characters are doing and what the story is trying to tell.
I guess that's a very good point, because if something was wrong, people would be the first to point that out about the production design, the set dressing, and everything around it. But I guess because it's so neatly woven in, no one can say anything. No one can say, "Oh, it's not. That looks like somebody's actual house," but really, that was built on a stage, for example. But actually, those sort of things.
Right. Yeah, I think that I mean, for me, coming from having doing a period movie like Babylon set in the 20s, it's they all have their challenges and they're all hard, and it's very hard to find period furnishings and lighting and everything for a period movie that was set in 1920s. But sometimes, like, a contemporary movie is almost harder sometimes, because when you're set in the 1920s, you're very limited on what the look of the movie is. You go back, to the late 1800s or the early 1900s. But when you do a contemporary movie, it could be anything. And sometimes, to kind of establish that and create that world, it's sometimes challenged, because what is it? With One Battle, it was very much, Paul wanted to, the early reference for us was the French Connection. He wanted a very much the sets to be real, to feel real, and he almost wanted to shoot it in a documentary style. And so that was the challenge, because there were some locations that he'd be like, "Don't touch a thing," even though we had to go in and replace, artwork and stuff because we couldn't clear it. And it was a challenge to make the sets that we were dressing feel as real as the sets that he would just walk in and shoot. Because you never wanted to, look at the movie and be like, "Oh, well, that's a set and that's real."
Yeah, and it's. I think with something like this, if somebody comes onto set, it's like, no, just keep it as it is, especially when you're on location compared to working on the stage. Because I guess with a stage, you kind of have like a blank canvas, whilst on location, if you're using somebody's house, as you mentioned, and I keep this painting on the wall, for example, or keep that cabinet. But then, if that painting, you don't have an artist, you don't know who the artist is, you don't know who, how you're going to clear it. I guess you probably have to sneakily switch it out for something very similar, hoping that no one noticed.
Well, that was. I hope Paul doesn't listen to this, because that happened quite a bit, to where he would love it the way it was, and we would spend a lot of effort to try to clear it, and not knowing the artist or whatever, and we would find art that was the same size and that looked very similar, and replace it without him knowing it. And yeah, luckily we never got caught. But yeah, that was a challenge. But it was, I think looking back on it, it was that there was an aesthetic of, when you work on a Paul Thomas Anderson movie, nothing can be perfect. He doesn't like things perfect. He likes things real. And as long as we were putting forth that effort to create a real aesthetic environment for the actors to kind of walk in, and everything, for instance, in Bob's house and Carlos Sensei's apartment, everything worked. The ceiling fans worked, the refrigerators worked, the stoves, so that Willa could cook. Like, he wanted everything to feel very much real, and every drawer was filled. Every the junk drawer had a story. The Sensei's apartment and Bob's house, the drawers, you open up the sock drawer, they're Leo size socks. It's everything, because you never knew what Paul allowed. We create this environment, and then Paul allowed the actors to improv a lot. So I remember on the first day of filming was in Willow's history class with the teacher. And it wasn't scripted, it wasn't asked for, but I dressed it with famous American presidents posters on the walls, because of an American history class. And when I watch the dailies, I see that Leo starts talking about all the presidents on the walls. And so you realize, and that was the first day of filming, so you realize that whatever environment we created, even though it wasn't in the script, it could always be in play. I mean the scene of Carlos Sensei when he goes into his apartment and opens up the fridge and grabs a Modelo beer and hands one to Bob, that wasn't scripted. I mean, I had just dressed Modelo beers in the refrigerator, and the refrigerator was working, and they were cold, and Carlos Sensei grabbed a beer and handed one to Bob, and then all of a sudden it became a part of the movie.
When you have something like that, because build up these characters, their homes, and what their home life is like, and it's very important, because you get an idea of, you can get snippets, and then also, once the film comes out on like DVD or on VOD, avid fans can probably go for scene, frame by frame, to be like, oh my gosh, look at this in minute 32. I think there's one bit where there's Bob and Willow having conversation at their table, and there's a glass on top of the table, and you have all the artwork there. Yeah. It's like little tidbits like that. And I think I heard you mention it on another on the set decor inside the set, where you were saying about how that's how we built up the character that you didn't want to let go. Those pieces of art from Willow from when she was younger, and I guess as well, like, once you see the film progress more, you understand it's a way of Leo's character trying to be a parent, but not necessarily knowing how, in a way, because it's a way of, like, in terms of like how he expresses himself.
Yeah, it was important. It was important to, well, it's always important to Paul, is that there's places in Los Angeles that you can go get cleared kids artwork that was probably created by an adult trying to do kids art. And it's important to Paul. It's also important to me, is that a lot of the kids artwork that was in Bob's house was my own kids artwork from that they did when they were young, and Paul's kids too. And it was just a touch of, like, Leo is, Bob's character is stuck in the past. He's not allowing her to grow. He's afraid to let her grow up and go out into the world. And he holds on to all those things. And especially some of her younger artwork, me and Florencia spent a day after we addressed the set. We had spent a day in there, just me and her, and doing all the little details. And I just thought it was a nice touch to put, he's protecting them underneath the glass that's on top of the dining tables, all of her artwork. And it's a funny little thing when Colonel Lockjaw breaks down the door and he comes in and he grabs the photo of Willa on the little bulletin board above the little credenza. There's a set of little pink hands that are right next to the photo that you see right in the frame, and those are my son Tony's hands. So when we get to see the movie, it's always cool to, like, for my kids to kind of see the little pieces that they put in. But yeah, I think and it kind of creates Bob's arc, because it's interesting at the end of the movie, where he's on an iPhone and she's on an iPhone, and then the ham radio goes off and he lets her go off to I think it was Berkeley or somewhere to go fight her revolution. So yeah, it was yeah.
And I guess those those little tidbits are always going to be stuff that will build up, and it's also a nice way of you showing your kids as well. It's like, hey, I still kept all your artwork as well, and now it's forever immortalized on film. So
yeah,
don't say I never did anything for you.
Right.
And then what I'm curious, I just want to sort of go back to the point as well you're making about when you're filling out people's homes or various locations, and it feels like there's certain sort of like happy accidents that because of your set dressing, it sparks something in actors. So for example, like the beer, do you have something like that consciously in your mind, or are you thinking about, I have a certain amount of time that I need to dress this set, let's think, we'll put beer in the fridge here, we'll put the cutlery in this drawer, and then we'll put, I don't know, a junk drawer here, or do you sort of sit down and sort of meticulously plan with Florencia and other department heads?
Well, I think that with One Battle and with Paul is that he writes this amazing script, and he kind of allows Florencia and myself and our teams to kind of build the characters, and which is the funnest part. And because it's Paul's not like necessarily like, oh, I want kids artwork, I want underneath is that he allows us to kind of do it. I mean, yeah, I mean, on One Battle is that, like I said, is that Paul wanted to shoot it very much documentary style, 360 degrees. We had to be prepared for everything. And what was nice about One Battle is that, with set dressing, you usually don't have enough time. But with Bob's house, we probably had a good full week and a half to dress it by ourselves. And then with Carlos Sensei's apartment, we had time too, and the dojo. So, the sets that were really important, I felt like we had our time to kind of get everything roughed in, get it dressed, and then sit there and kind of tweak with the details. A happy accident. Well, in Carlos Sensei's apartment, when Leo goes to close the drapes and the drapes fall down, that was not planned. That wall was one of the only walls that was part of the original loft, because it was a complete build, and we had to have a special company come in to drill the holes to hang the rod, and it was just a drape. It was ready-made shears that I had purchased in Mexico, because El Paso, Texas is right on the border of Mexico. Because I kind of felt like that's what Carlos Sensei would do. He would go across to Mexico and he would find some cheap shears and he would hang them, and they were just hanged on a rod. And then when Leo, and it worked because it was perfect. But that was a happy accident. It was not planned. And then there's a lot of those that kind of happened, because like I said, is that Paul allowed, as long as the sets were dressed and everything was dressed, he would just the actors would just move around the space.
Knowing that you have that 360, that they're going to be shooting documentary stuff, a lot of movement, there's no way you can hide certain things. Like if somebody shot something on like an over, behind the shoulder, you could then get away with maybe a more shallow depth of focus behind them, so you can hide things or just tilt things slightly a bit more. And that must add so much more pressure to you and your team, though, right?
Well, it does, but it also is very rewarding at the same time, because like when you walked in Carlos Sensei's apartment, it did not look like a film set. It would look like, people live there. And then it also kind of, you're never, the worst case is always like, you prepare to shoot this, they're not going to see behind you. They're only going to shoot this. And then the last minute they're shooting, behind you, and you're scrambling to go to try to fill, so it's kind of nice that, once we handed over the set, we knew that they had everything. There was never a question that they didn't have whatever they wanted to do, and then the freedom to do it. So, I mean, even when we went to El Paso, Texas, to shoot all the Back 10 cross stuff, the dojo and everything, is that by the time the shooting company, I forget which city they were shooting at before that, but I had moved ahead and went to El Paso to get it all ready. And by the time Paul and company showed up, we had dressed probably a dozen storefronts, quinceanera shops, electronic stores, convenience stores, clothing stores, shoe stores, probably hung somewhere around 300 to 500 fluorescent tubes throughout the streets, because Paul likes the light with fluorescent lighting and practical lighting. Had the dojo ready and Carlos Sensei's apartment, so that when he arrived, he had El Paso, Texas to go shoot, and he had the freedom to shoot whatever he wanted. So, because the schedule was, I mean, even though, the schedule didn't change, like we were shooting in this location and then we moved that, but one day Paul would just be like, oh, I want to shoot the dojo, and the dojo was ready. Or one day I want to shoot Carlos Sensei's. And so that was El Paso, Texas. It was a massive dress that took a lot of resources to get done. But by the time the company showed up, it was all ready to shoot. So
that must be quite cool, though, knowing that you have this set and you're thinking we're gonna have a certain amount of days to dress all of this, and we're gonna fill it with all this stuff, and it's gonna look perfect for once everybody pulls up all the trucks and they're ready to shoot. I wonder what it must be like for crew who are not involved in the set deck side to sort of just turn up and be like, wow, this looks incredible, or it's like, have they actually done anything? Because it all looks like area.
We would dress, electronic stores and convenience stores, and locals would walk in and want to buy something, and we're like, no, this is, and then that's the best compliment you get, is that when it looks real. And I mean, that was also a part of the movie was, usually when you go on location, and we're based in Los Angeles, is that you go and you scout and you figure out what you need, and then you shop it all out of LA, and you fill up trucks and you go there and you dress it. And that was not the way we made this movie. It was very important to Paul. He spent, him and Florencia Martin, the production designer, and Adam Somner, the first AD, and Michael Glazier, the location manager, spent years scouting this movie. And they went, all through California. They ended up in El Paso, Texas for a portion of it. But it was important for Paul and Florencia to use as much as we could out of the local communities that we shot at. So we did, we would bring a certain element of LA that I knew that we would never be able to find in some of these small towns. But for the most part, Bob's house was shopped out of Eureka, California. El Paso, Carlos Sensei's apartment, we shopped everything out of El Paso, Texas. I would send crew and buyers, a good chunk of time before we would go there, and they would source local artists, their stores, shops, everything, and we would use as much from the community as possible. I mean, we tried to, it was also part of the character too. It was like, Bob lives up in the Redwoods, and he's kind of, what would Bob do? He's like, he sits on his, lays on his couch and watches the Battle of Algiers all day long, and he would probably want a really comfy couch. And where would Bob get that couch? Well, he's not going to go buy one at a department store or a brick and mortar store. He's going to go to a thrift store and he's going to buy a comfy couch. And so it was always kind of like, that was our mindset, is to try to put ourselves in the characters and what would the characters do. And, they're not pulling, it was important, they're not pulling stuff from a prop house in Los Angeles and traveling it across the 48 footers to go dress a location. It was, and that was almost like the happy accidents too, is that, I would be in a coffee shop in Eureka and they have local artwork on the walls and with the artist's name, and I would just buy a piece of art. And, in Bob's house, right to the right of the front door is a piece of art from a coffee shop in Eureka. And then we met a cool local artist in Eureka that threw pottery and also painted. And a lot of the artwork that was in Bob's bedroom was from him, and a lot of the pottery.
So just very quickly, I think, as you said, the biggest compliment is locals coming in trying to buy stuff. I think if a producer heard that, they'd probably think, if you can hold off for a couple of weeks, then we can recoup some of our money back and put it back into the film. But with even like dressing and like the happy accident side of stuff, where you can probably plan each set to the inch of its life and think, yep, we've got everything right. But then if a happy accident happened, where at first you probably think this is going to be horrendous, this is going to be terrible, but then actually it works in the end, and it's like there's something there that will spark a character's imagination, or it will even add something in where somebody else might not have thought of beforehand, and it's just sort of come up nicely for you guys.
Yeah, there was a piece of art that I had purchased at a thrift store in early prep, and it was a panther that I wanted to put in Sensei's apartment, and we could never find the artist. Warner Brothers wouldn't clear it. I wanted to use it so bad. And, eventually they just wouldn't clear it. So when I was in El Paso, Texas, our local buyer recommended a local artist in El Paso, Texas, that I literally took the painting and met him on the corner outside of Sensei's apartment, handed him the painting and said, could you just I love the painting the way it is. It was a Black Panther on a tree limb. And could you just alter it a bit to make it your own so that we can clear it? And we paid him a certain amount of money. And he came back a couple days later and handed me the painting. And it wasn't the panther, it was a tiger. And the background was completely changed. And it's the painting that is above the couch in Carlos Sensei's apartment. And at first I was like, oh my God, like this is so different. Like, but that was a happy accident where I can't imagine. I mean, if you've seen, when you see the movie, everybody asks, where'd you get that tiger painting? And I go, well, there's a story behind that. And it was just a happy accident that he had done something totally different and it was better.
But I still imagine that first seeing it, that you must have your heart in your mouth, being like,
oh yeah,
what have you done? Like,
no, it was because we didn't have time to change it. It had to be that. And I remember even Florencia, because the kind of way we worked with this movie is we prepped in Los Angeles, and then we both went up to Eureka, was the first location we were filming. And we both spent time getting all the sets ready for Eureka. And then by the time the company started shooting in Eureka, I would always, leave to go prep the next location, and Florencia would stay with the shooting company. And it's kind of the way it had to work. I mean, I think once we started filming, me and Florencia probably spent a couple weeks together over the whole movie, because I always had to move forward to get the next location ready. And I just remember when she walked into Carlos Sensei's apartment, and she was just like amazed. She loved it. But she's like, where did you get that tiger painting? And I go, that's the panther that I was trying to clear for months. And she goes, oh my God, I love it.
It's still funny though. That's just, and I bet you it's probably hanging up in someone's room now, being like, "Yep, we've got it," or it might be above your bed in your bedroom. Who knows?
No, it's not. I don't know who ended up with that painting, but I'd like to find out, because that yeah. I mean, most people when they watch the movie, they're like, "Where'd you get that tiger painting?"
It's one of a kind as well.
Yeah.
What I'm also very curious to know about is you've mentioned a lot about company moves and shooting on location. As a set decorator, because you're moving around so much, you're in different areas where you might not necessarily know where the best prop houses are, or even if the area has a prop house. How do you go about prepping for working on location compared to working in a stage, for example?
Well, I think when you're in Los Angeles, you can find anything. I mean, there's tons of prop houses. You kind of over the years, which prop house has certain things, and you know where to get it. I mean, it was kind of at first it was kind of daunting, like, oh, we're going off into these, because we were shooting in very small communities that never had a lot of filming there, so there wasn't prop houses. But I mean, that was also the kind of joy about it, was that the communities became part of the movie. I mean, we were shooting in places that hadn't been filmed out a lot, so they're welcoming, and you just figure it out. And whenever you get kind of thrown a curveball, I mean, you always knew that if you couldn't find it, that we could always ship it in from Los Angeles. I always kind of, the way that we did it is that both myself and Florence, I would move ahead to the next city, and then the crews, where I think we're in nine or 10 different locations, is that a set of a crew would go to like Eureka, and then we would dress there, and then that crew would come back to Los Angeles and kind of prep for like 3 locations later, and then another crew that would us always prepping at the next location. So it was kind of like this checkerboard kind of thing. But I mean, you always kind of know that you do have the safety net at Los Angeles, and I always kind of had a team back there in case we could not find something, and to kind of get it to us quickly. I mean, we're in locations that if you ordered something from Amazon, it would come 5 days later. Like, it was hard to get things. But then I don't know, you just kind of, there was those challenges sometimes where you're like, oh my God, where am I going to find it? And you're up at like 11 o'clock at night going, oh my God, like it shoots in a day, and like where, but it just always, I have a really good team, and we kind of just figured it out.
Okay. Again, it's interesting to hear, because if you're in a sort of area that's so, as you said, not much filming happens, so there's not going to be resources. You just have to be a lot more creative in how you're looking for things. And also, like, even though you have that safety net of Los Angeles and we can ship things in, I think also you kind of put that in the back of your mind, because you want to make sure that you don't need to rely on that.
Yeah, I mean, there was we had shot in San Juan Bautista. It was for the beginning of the movie that Paul ended up cutting, and then we reshot the camp that's at the beginning of the movie. But I remember when we were in San Juan Bautista, I dressed this kind of hostel area up above this hotel, and we had all the beds in there. And over in the corner, I had dressed in kind of just a bunch of junk that would have been there at one point, but it was kind of pushed into the corner. And I had an old AV cart with a TV on it, but the TV didn't work. This is a lesson you learn working on a Paul Thomas Anderson movie. Because all of a sudden at like 8 o'clock at night, he wants the TV working. And it was one of those TVs that you put the old VHS tape in the bottom, it's like the combo. And we're like, oh my God, it's 8 o'clock at night, and we're in San Juan Bautista. Where are we going to get a TV that works? And Sammy Tell, one of my buyers, went to the local bar and just asked, and the bartender's like, oh yeah, I got one of those at my house. And then Sammy went to this house, got the TV, and then since it was a Warner Brothers movie, he's like, do you have any Warner Brothers VHS tapes that we could clear? And he did. And then he ran it back to the set, put it on the AV card, put the VHS tape in it, and then it was, there we go. So it was instances like those where, and you know, there was the last minute kind of scramble sometimes, but the communities kind of jumped in. Like everybody always has something.
I think with those communities as well, it's a niche thing that somebody will have, and that they will always, there'll be a really good story behind it, and they're always happy to help. Because I remember speaking to a production designer. I can't remember what it was. I think it was something to do with like rock shapes or digging holes, and she was talking about it in a cafe or a bar, and the guy was like, "Yeah, that's basically my job," and help them out exactly what they needed to do. And it was just like, what a crazy coincidence that the thing that he exactly needed was there. And the fact they also had like Warner Brother tapes. You know, it's like amazing to think how long he must have kept onto those VHS tapes.
No, yeah, I mean that happened. I mean, even when we were in El Paso, Texas, and we shot Somerville's house with all the ham radios, those were working ham radios, and we found a ham radio club in El Paso, Texas, that had you don't see it in Somerville's house, but there's this humongous antenna that's attached to the house that they had, and we found, and we rented it from them, the ham radio station in El Paso, Texas, and we transported it to Somerville's house. And then all the ham radios worked. I mean, when he's using them, those are working ham radios. But then we would hire the local ham radio guy to be our advisor, and he would come down to the set to make sure they worked, because there's no, in Paul's movie, there's no like make believe. Whenever somebody's on the phone, when you hear the other person on it, they're actually calling on that phone. So there's no like, everything has to be real and practical. But I mean, that was the thing. And it was also like, I mean, if you're in Los Angeles and, there's probably, it's harder to find a ham radio station with ham radio guys, but you go off to El Paso, Texas, which is a small community, and yeah, there's a ham radio station, there's a ham radio club, and they all get together once a week, and they're more than happy to come down to our set and help us set it all up to make it look real.
I think as well, it's probably quite exciting for them that they can lend their expertise, and also you're on a Paul Thomas Anderson film, and also somebody's probably taken a really keen interest in what you're interested in, and they probably would be able to speak for days about these ham radios.
Yeah.
But then also it's like, what about different types? And actually, you don't want to use that one because that would not broadcast there. You want to use this one, but then you might not be able to use that mic because the jack's wrong or something as well.
No, and I mean, Paul used a lot of non-actors in the movie. I mean, the little boy that radios off on the ham radio to, once Somerville gets taken, he's a neighbor of the house. And then the little piece of paper that he reads his lines off of, we put it on there because he couldn't, my on-set dresser ended up actually putting it there because he couldn't get the lines quite right. And so we're like, oh, well, maybe, Somerville would just have it there, so he knows to radio it off. Yeah, but I mean, it was cool. I mean, it's, I mean, that's what I mean. It's the cities that we went into were more than happy and excited to be part of the movie. And I mean, even, yeah. And then, I mean, an interesting point too is that, Florencia and Paul had scouted this movie for so long. And so, in Eureka, she probably looked at, 20, 30 different Bob's houses before we decided on that one. But the other 29 houses, I would always refer to those photographs as our research, because that's how people lived in Eureka, out in the woods. They didn't throw things away. Like, it was interesting. I mean, I saw a photo of a bedroom with a bed and then a couch at the foot of the bed. And you always wonder, I mean, me as a set decorator, I was, well, what's the story behind that? Why is the couch at the foot of the bed? Well, maybe because they got a new couch and they didn't want to throw away the old couch, so they just put it at the foot of the bed. But I think without, I mean, that it was a great source for research and it was kind of like our Bible for all the locations. I mean, even in El Paso, Texas, all the locations that Flo and Paul had gone into, real immigrants' homes, the way that they lived and the things that they had was our source of inspiration and research to do Carlos Sensei's apartment. And I mean, that was based off real locations that they would go into. And I mean, even I know that Flo had talked about it, even the mats that, once you go through the perfumia and you walk up the stairs and all the immigrants are sleeping on the mats and stuff and all their artworks up on the wall. That's real kids' artwork from a church down the street where they house immigrants. And it was real artwork from the kids. And then the mats we rented from the church. So it was those things that we tried to rent things and find things and get things that were from the community that were used as the same purpose.
I think it's also like fascinating to get that realism of feel, and even mentioning about like actors being locals and like the kid who lived next door, but even having that little bit of like the reading of the lines, because they are quite, I would say if you're not a performer, they're probably quite difficult to remember, even though it's a code, but it's like a very specific words in
Yeah.
it. So again, if you're the first time with a camera in your face, it's probably just like absolutely nerve-wracking. And then having that there is just genius, because you only people in the know will know what that means.
Right.
But yeah, it was pretty good idea from one of your dressers to put that in there.
Right.
You were mentioning as well about the opening scene. That was a quite big action. It's one of the big action scenes in the film. It feels like with the lights, it feels like it's like a Terminator 2, how it's lit in the dark. As a set decorator, when you have scenes that require big action set pieces and potential things being destroyed and or explosions, how do you go about planning for those scenes and thinking about what you're going to get and how many multiples you might need to buy as well?
I mean, that's always, a conversation is like, how many times is it going to get destroyed? Usually with Paul, it's like one take. So they just kind of destroy the thing you get. Um, the camp in the beginning, yeah, the everything was, I mean, Paul, he wanted, the whacker lights that are lighting that camp, the construction, like big towers, were actually lighting the camp. I mean, those are real lights. We would get them, and the electricians would work on them and make sure that they were the right color temperature and everything for filming. Is that, yeah, everything was just real. I mean, the bank explosion in we had done that in Sacramento, and that was always because at first we weren't going to do it, and then we ended up doing it. And I'm like, oh my God, do I need to find like 3 or 4 of everything? And they're like, no, we'll just one take and just blow it up, and that's it. Yeah, I can't, I don't, trying to remember, but I don't think in anything we would do more than one take. I mean, I think the car crash that's down in Borrego is that Paul just set up a lot of cameras, and they did it once and they got it. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of planning that goes along with that, and Paul kind of knows what he wants and he knows how to get it, and then they just, yeah. I mean, usually, like on a movie, I've done a lot of Marvel movies where they blow everything up, and you prepare and you get ready for 6 takes of an explosion, but not with Paul.
Well, that was not what I was expecting, that answer.
Yeah.
Well, I guess as well, that makes your job slightly easier, knowing that I do know what, just need one of these. I don't need to worry about potentially getting 5 of these sort of plates, for example, or all these like or certain pieces of art. It's just going to happen, and we'll move on.
Right.
But yeah, again, wow, what a way to work. just to wrap up this episode, what was your favorite set to work on?
It was probably, I mean, Bob's was awesome. I mean, it was probably Carlos Sensei's apartment. It was fun. It was, you know, an interesting story about that one, and I mentioned on the set decor thing, is that everything had to go through a window. It was, you know, on the second story, it was a huge loft, and there was a set of stairs that went up, but the stairs were really steep, and you couldn't get anything up the stairs. So construction had gone in and removed a window, and they forklift all the raw lumber through the window and then built the set inside the loft. And then every piece of set dressing had to go through the window. And then once the set was dressed, all the camera gear, all the lighting, everything had to go through the window. But it was fun to create not only Carlos Sensei's apartment, but you know, there was 6 other apartments attached to that set, and to kind of create a story for each apartment was fun. And we had some time in that apartment to kind of really make sure that all the little details were in there. And yeah, it was fun to create Carlos Sensei's character. Something I talk about too is, you know, I always try to put a record player in a set. And the albums, I try to go out with the buyers and we pick the albums that we think Carlos Sensei would listen to, or Bob, you know, whatever Bob had in his apartment too. And I remember when I open the set, I always kind of have music playing. So when the actors and Paul first walk onto a set, I always feel like it's like, it just kind of creates a mood. And I remember I had some Carlos Santana playing in Carlos Sensei's apartment, and Benicio walked in and he was like, "Ah, yeah, Carlos Santana." And then a lot of time, you know, we shot in that apartment for at least a week or 2 weeks. And sometimes Paul would not go with the company to go eat lunch, and he would just sit in Carlos Sensei's apartment and pull out an album out of his collection and put it on the record player and just sit there and listen to music. And so, you know, because sometimes, you know, you have just put those are background. Well, nothing was background. You know, you knew at any moment that any album could get pulled out, and it had to be something that, you know, Carlos Sensei would listen to. Yeah, and it was just the little details, you know, his little Superman collection next to his couch. And you know, I would try to make him, you know, maybe he would lay in bed and you know, because he's a bachelor, but his you know, he's different than Bob. Everything's very tight, you know. He teaches karate, so there's a certain discipline about that. So, you know, everything's kind of got its little place. And then, you know, maybe he lays in bed and he, you know, puts on his headphones and plays video games. And, you know, it's kind of building those little characters into the set. And then also the other 6. So I would say Carlos Sensei's apartment was pretty awesome. It was fun. And then, you know, Bob's was too, you know, creating a little rock collection on Bob's windowsill when he looks out at Willa, and the little details.
I think they're very solid choices, and I think as well, like, God, imagine the shock on the face if they pulled out like a One Direction record or something, instead of like Carlos Santana, or even if Paul was listening to something like that. That'd be quite fun. Like, it wouldn't be funny for yourself, but it'd be funny just overall. Just be like, "Oh, what's this?" It's like, you never know. I might dabble in it.
Yeah, no. I mean, we went to a local record shop in El Paso and pulled all the albums. But I think also is that, you know, you can plan for everything and kind of think of it. But I always find that as a decorator, it's always the most, you know, is getting out and shopping and going into stores, and then you find things that you never could think about. And or you go into people's homes who are welcoming, and you're like, oh my God, that's corner of senses. I want to look just like that. It's like the part of discovery, you know, like, which is the unexpected things that you could never possibly think about, that you can only get when you just get out there and start, you know, finding things and going into stores and going into people's homes. And you know,
yeah. And I think a good thing is it's basically just like vicariously watching what people buy and what they have in their homes and making a mental note for have that Rolodex in your mind for when you have a project coming up or with whatever you're working on. Yeah, it's
Yeah, man,
again fascinating.
No, I think all set decorators are very much sponges. We try to everything that we see is that we're just trying to absorb it all and then eventually use it somewhere. It's I mean, I'm constantly whenever I'm anywhere and I see something that, oh man, that would be amazing, and I don't know what, but I'll take photographs, and I have a whole collection of research. But I mean, that was a great thing about One Battle is that you know Florencia and Paul spent I mean 2 years scouting this movie, and so we had so much research from real places, real homes, real that was our research, which in most movies, I mean, how many movies do you ever get where the production designer and the director scout for 2 years?
Yeah,
So
and it's also the patience of like doing something like that must be insane, because if you can't find something, it must be really frustrating. Or if you found something, you're kind of like, well, maybe we can find something slightly better because we've been kind of like picking at it so much. Yeah, incredible, really. Anthony, thank you so much for your time today.
thanks for having me. It was awesome.
One Battle After Another is out now. Go out and see Anthony and his team's amazing work. Thank you again.
Thanks, Robert.
You take care, and bye-bye. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.